a red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we're here with Sasha Josette. Hello, Sasha.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent, and thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So we're going to go straight into the first question, which is, what is socialism to you?
It's a really big question for a starter. What does it mean? So when my first memory of socialism or of organising is being like really, really young, as in like baby on hip. My family are from Malaysia and my parents were both trade union organisers in Malaysia. And I have this memory of my mum taking me up a kind of windy road through the jungle up into a village where workers were, where they were organising workers. And the whole kind of atmosphere was very, I mean, kind of very different from workplace organising here, which is kind of, you know, not in a village in the middle of the jungle. But so it was very, very different experience, of course. But they would be organising workers who perhaps didn't have an education or were illiterate, and there would be children running around, and there'd be kind of, it was very, you know, we have a posh word for it now, intergenerational, but basically like everyone, the whole family would be there, you know, it was like politics for everyone. And they wouldn't necessarily talk about socialism. They would go in and organise and talk to people about what their workday was like, what they needed. Could your children go to school? And the children who couldn't afford school fees, they would then kind of come up with some kind of fund to help pay for school fees for the kids to go to school, and kind of literacy programs, and, you know, really building power on what we would, you know, on that scale. But like, you'd be absolutely sure that 6 months, 12 months down the road, those same people will be in my mum and dad's front room talking about and reading the Communist Manifesto. But it took all those stages. They didn't go in with that. They went in with me, with grandparents, with aunts. And I remember lots of food, and I remember being passed around, and I'd be on someone else's hip and playing with some kids in the corner. And we all absorbed it. We grew up in this kind of energy and climate of organising, of listening, and like trying, like really understanding the needs of workers and how we go about solving them. And in that process comes trade union organising and becoming a member of a trade union or forming your own trade union. And in that process becomes a kind of self-education of like, what are you going to learn? What do you need to learn to organise? Political education. So I think like that was something that memory is something that I've always really carried with me. And as I grew up, like, I mean, my mum would, my lullabies were kind of, you know, socialist songs. Like, I knew Solidarity Forever before I knew like a Disney song, basically. And like some of my early childhood books, I remember this one book, which was basically a cartoon illustration of how all the cartoon characters go on strike because they don't like how they're treated. And another book where it was two kings who and their people had a revolution and forced them to go back to school and forced them to go and work in the fields and learn what it is to live in their countries before they were allowed to rule again. So like, I was kind of brought up in this kind of, well, I now realize it's probably quite unusual. And then we became, so my mum and I came here probably when I was about 5, and we're political exiles. And that was a huge, so my kind of childhood experience kind of went from Malaysia and all this very different kind of community organizing that's also political organizing and trade union organizing, to here in the middle of the 80s to find like miners' strikes and poll tax riots and like completely, you know, this is like the middle of the Thatcher era. And my mum got straight into organizing again. She was involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and, you know, and I was kind of again brought up with all of that around me. But I think like there's somewhere between that and like secondary school and like learning and trying to fit in, and going to uni and deciding what to do at uni. And I went into design, and like I think my dad probably thinks I'm quite bougie. He was just like, I remember saying to him, oh, I think I want to do an art foundation. And he was like that's a bourgeois luxury. I was like, thanks, Dad. Love you too. I don't think he like totally meant it, but I can also understand what he meant by it, as in like we're working class, we're refugees, like how are you going to support yourself in life? Like, we don't have that luxury. It felt to him like such a privilege to even consider and ask it, whereas for me, I grew up here and it felt like a bit more options that are a bit more open to me. But I did kind of, at that point, socialism didn't probably stopped meaning as much to me outside of going to protests. I certainly wasn't involved in party politics. There might have been a few solidarity groups that I was still involved with, mostly around the women's sector and feminism, and feminist organising. But like I didn't have that fire in my belly. And then I had kids quite young, and a single mum, and like then socialism really didn't mean very much, apart from something I needed, so I didn't have to have fucking universal credit, and having to deal with like the everyday struggles, basically, which is really all I had time for. And I always felt like I didn't have a space in the political life here at all. Where would I possibly fit in? And particularly I was outside of London by this point, and it's quite a white area where I am. And it's like, there are so many like barriers to entry into political organising already. I kind of gave up, actually. And then one day the kids were, I can't remember how old they were because my timelines are all over the place. I think it must be like childhood trauma that did it. I can never remember timelines. And one day, that one kid was in the bath refusing to get out of the bath, and the other one was running around the bedroom like with pajamas half on half off, laughing her head off, not doing as she's told. And they're still like that now. I mean, they still don't do as they're told. I obviously have like zero authority over my kids. And the radio was on, and I heard them talking about Jeremy Corbyn, blah blah blah, might be leader of the Labour Party, it's on the ballot paper, blah blah blah, something. I was like, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, God, that name rings a bell. Like, what's that? And it always makes me laugh like that I even had that thought, because he's like a household name now. And so I spoke to my mum later that day, and I was just like, Mum, I just heard this thing going on in the Labour Party and this Jeremy guy. And she was just like, are you actually serious right now? Like, child, sit yourself down. And she came over, so this is the next stage, like, sit yourself down. And she had a box, and she like, don't you remember all those demonstrations we went to? You remember that solidarity thing? You remember that War on Want event we went to? And do you remember the solidarity fair at Conway Hall? And do you remember, like, she kind of rattled off this whole list of things. It's like, oh yeah. She's like, he was there for all of them. Like, you remember that demonstration? We were standing right at the front with a big banner, and we were leading the demonstration. I was like, oh, I remember that. She was like, we were there. That was us, standing with him, standing with them. They always stood in solidarity with solidarity movements with us, always. I was like, okay, you're getting really passionate about this now. And she opened the box and she pulled out a piece of paper, and it was a letter calling for my dad's release from prison, signed Jeremy Corbyn. And I think it was at that point I was like, oh, that's okay. Maybe now there is someone who can push open the doors for people, not just with my political beliefs, but who are working class, who are black and brown, who are refugees, who have struggled, who are on benefits, who are single mums, who are like, name the fucking shit we all have to put up with. And maybe there is someone who has always stood with us, who is going to be there and who will open the door so that we will finally have a voice and open that space so we can be in it to organize and not be told what we think and what we should do next. And I think that was kind of a light bulb moment when I finally thought, okay, well, that's what socialism is, right? That's what it does. It allows space for working class people to come together and organize. And I think pretty much everything I've done since that light bulb moment has been about organizing and political education.
Wow, I think we've had some really good answers before, but that was amazing. Like, you know, like, we've never had one where we've had people going through the jungle as a child to do community organizing event. That is so good. I was like,
Awesome.
I'm sure our viewers are probably feeling quite like me. They're just like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. So so you were you were a political refugee, did you say? Is that what, you know?
Yeah. So my dad was a prisoner of conscience. And so he was imprisoned in Malaysia. My mum and I came here, so we were exiled here. And it wasn't until I was 16 when I finally got a chance to go back this time, like having had one of those awful, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but in those days they were like bright blue. I'm pretty sure it said UN on it, refugee passports. They were just so awful to travel with because you got stopped and interrogated everywhere you went. And then finally at 16, I got this British passport and we were able to go home and visit family and see comrades again. And that was amazing because, you know, I left at 5, so there was a lot that I don't remember, but there are a lot of smells and feelings, and like there was so much in my heart that I was carrying, and it was nice to go back and kind of see that, see the memories come alive, and also kind of feel like I was rooted somewhere when it's really difficult, when, you know, you go from one country to another to know where your feet, which country your feet are in. And that's another thing that I think actually, like the 2016 time when I kind of got back into organizing and political organizing here, kind of, I really felt like there was something to fight for. There was a country to fight for. There was a country to win for. There was a sense of wanting to transform the world starting from here. And that was really nice. It felt really good to have that chance.
It was a good time back then, and like fighting for something positive, and you know, and it's funny as well because we have these discussions around national pride and those kinds of things. And I often find like one of the things that I am proudest of is the idea that you could have a political refugee come to the country. That's the kind of country that surely we want to be. Like, surely we want to be a safe place for everyone, and you know, that is where, you know, any, like, you know, it's not in a flag, it's in the people, and it's in like the fact that, you know, we can be a safe place for people. And I feel like, do you feel like that's kind of disappearing a little bit, that feeling? Because I think during the Corbyn moment, I suppose,
I'm not entirely sure it was completely here, and to a certain extent I wonder whether I was also quite lucky because my parents were political, and so there's a kind of like political education that I got that a lot of people around me didn't, and you know, that was kind of a privilege really, which is why when I kind of got back into organizing, like the political education bit for me had to kind of be kind of self-education. It had to come from working class communities. It had to come from us, and we build it and co-curate it together, not something that's handed down to us, even if it's by the left. Like, and I think that's really, that bit's always been really important to me because that's how I grew up. And I grew up with people who weren't necessarily politically educated, and like we worked it out together. And I think, like, in terms of if there's any feeling of nationalism I have, it's about wanting to fight for a country in which we can come together and we can organize together and we can win things for each other. And that's the bit that we don't have anymore because those rights are being broken down. systematically over and over and over again. So that's the bit that I'd want to change: trade union laws and our rights to organise, our right to protest, as in kill the bill stuff that's happening at the moment. Like, there are so many things that are being taken away, which actually makes us who we are.
Do you think that kind of people might not realize how important those things are if they haven't needed them? Like, we're getting a different type of protester at the moment, where you've got like you've got right-wing protesters and stuff who are absolutely furious, and we had some people saying about how freedom of speech to not take the knee for Premier League footballers because of freedom of speech, and then when they said they banned it for the Olympics, they were like, well, that's fine to ban it. It's fine for them not to have freedom of speech. But like, do you think that like being involved in it and having needed to protest, you have a deeper understanding, and then other people who haven't ever had that need simply can't understand how challenging this like kill the bill stuff is, like this bill coming in challenging our right to protest?
Yes and no. In one way, yes, I can see the rationality behind that, but on the other side, I think actually I'm always a bit wary of using that as an excuse for why people aren't protesting and why people aren't organising, because essentially we've like gone through a whole year of COVID, of lockdown, of isolation. We're facing mass unemployment. We've seen, with a collective grief of over 150,000 people die. We've all had friends and families with COVID, or have died, or have long COVID and are struggling. Like, the feeling of sending your kids to school, knowing that it increases their risk of getting COVID and bringing it home. The knowing that the R rates go up every time schools open again. Like, we've been under this constant trauma, and that trauma is like very much disproportionately impacted by Black and brown communities and working class communities. So for us to kind of expect the very people, the kill the bill protests and other laws are going to impact the most to be on the streets, is kind of like, it's one of the reasons why it took me so long to kind of get back into political organising. I'm fucking tired. It's hard work being a single mom and like doing all that shit, and then having to make it to a protest. Like, I felt really bad, and I messaged a friend of mine actually this morning, and I was going to keep it a secret, but I might as well tell you now because it's relevant. But I messaged her and I was like, I know there's the protest on Saturday and I really want to go, and I'm thinking of sending the kids with my mum and just like having a day to myself on my own in the house. I literally haven't been on my own I can't remember when the last time I had a day on my own, and I'm so tired and I can't face going out for a protest, and like I feel terrible. I feel so guilty. Like, we have to be there. We have to stand in solidarity with what's happening in Palestine, and like the Gaza protest is like, it's a no-brainer. We can't not be on the streets. But at the same time, I'm also tired, and I think actually that's probably got more to do with why people don't organise and don't hit the streets, and maybe might realise why it's important but aren't doing anything about it. Definitely don't think it's apathy or because it doesn't affect them. I think it's probably comes from that. And I suspect also the fear of police brutality being high up there on the list of reasons not to go out.
Yeah, I think it's so good to hear someone who understands that so well. And I think like during lockdown and everything, it has been really tiring. It's just like the constant nature of everything, the constant nature of your situation in the house and not having a minute to yourself. So, and that's like, we have two of us here, two adults here, and we feel like that. So it must be at least doubly as bad for you. But so I hope you do get a rest at some point, because we all need one. And so like with regards to you've talked a couple of times about education, and we talked about like you were heavily involved with a political education project. Now you've talked about education in a way that I think a lot of people would be like, oh well that's fine, but because I think what people fear is political education, or education at all, is people telling them things. Now, How do you see education?
Well, I guess it's kind of easier for me because I'm not an educator. So like I haven't got the theory behind what education is. But so back in 2016, at some point between having this light bulb moment and a few weeks later, I was at a Momentum Latinx launch event in London because I have a small group of Chilean friends who kind of were part of setting it up. And I went along, and to be quite honest, I was actually mostly there because my mate's mum makes the most amazing food, and he is an amazing DJ, and I was just like basically going for the food and the music. And I didn't even know what Momentum was actually at all. So I went along, and it was such an amazing event. They had like loads of stuff for children for a start. Like they got all the kids making these placards and like drawing big banners. And then when Jeremy came in, they all went up with these placards and like stood in front of him and did this kind of, all the kids did a little protest. Loads of music, loads of good music, loads of kind of like artwork around and dancing, and it was great. One of the speakers was this guy, and I saw him walk in. He had a backpack with like cricket bats in, and he had these like prayer beads, and he had long hair. And I was like, God, he looks well dodgy. Like, who dresses like that? He's one of my best friends now, and he doesn't mind me saying this because I say it to his face. But I was just like, that is weird. But we started chatting because he was talking about Momentum Arts and Media, and because of my kind of more creative background, I thought actually this sounds really interesting to kind of bring politics into that space. And then we met a week later and had coffee and talked more. And then a week after that, I was in the Momentum office in London, and like that was it. That's been my life since. And then in those discussions, at one point, I kind of like this is like really typical of a Momentum office. If you have an idea, someone will go there, you should do that. So I said, oh, we should really have some kind of like political education thing for kids and for young people. I'm thinking like primary school and secondary school. And I remember Adam Klug poking his head around, thinking, oh, that's a good idea. You should totally do that. And so Momentum Kids was born, and kind of like really went with it because it felt instantly like something so many people were really after for their own children, like parents and carers and grandparents. Like one of our biggest supporters was the over 65s for Corbyn, who were just amazing, the solidarity from them. And I think it was just, yeah, I mean, also the backlash that we got for doing it was absolutely crazy. Like we were called Minnie Mouse and Tiny Trots. I was trolled with pictures of like Hitler Youth. Almost every day people would send me pictures of Hitler Youth. And I thought, God, this is really stressful. But also, why are the right so scared of us educating our children? Like there is something in here and I'm not going to stop. So let's just keep going with that. That kind of moved on to developing strands of work with the World Transform Festival, another kind of like popular political education platform that we kind of run as a festival alongside Labour Party conference. And then, of course, the political education project, which started last year.
So can you tell me a little bit about the political education project and how that came about and what it's about?
Yes, so last year I was really excited to be approached by Paul, who I think you know as well, who was looking at building a team to work on a new political education project that kind of sat very much, I mean, it really kind of appealed to me because when we first talked, he also talked about a process of self-education, of political education being really rooted in working class communities, where we kind of like do the community organising that goes alongside with it. And so it's not top down. And the whole kind of plan for it was very much that, I mean, obviously this is like before all the lockdowns and stuff. The plan for it was very much for us to kind of do that. And so wherever we were placed around the country, and there were a few of us involved in different parts of the country, we could actually kind of go into our own areas and do that organising, and kind of Paul will help because he is an educator and he's really good at that stuff, help us build kind of curriculums that really matter to people, and around maybe perhaps issues that people have. So if you're doing issues on like you're involved in the housing campaign, then like let's build something with the people around you. And there are other political education projects, but I do think we've got quite a big world to win, and the more the merrier with projects like this. It doesn't necessarily have to sit in one particular place. There are different kind of people to run different things that will appeal to different people, and the more people doing it, the better. And one of the other kind of ethos behind it was very much about people kind of being as autonomous as possible and creating their own groups and their own reading groups, and we could kind of support and mentor and not necessarily kind of be the people building the curriculum. And then it looked like we were gonna be in lockdown forever, and so we kind of thought, right, well, let's just try it out online and see how it goes. It's not ideal, but we are all organisers at heart, and we know how to connect with people, and we'll try our best through the actual events to make those connections, and then go back to some of the, there are a few people, for example, who had some really interesting things to say on the chat, who I then would like direct message and maybe have a one-to-one with later, and like, maybe they'll come back and help us build a curriculum later on. And there was definitely one amazing young woman called Shameen who then came back and chaired an event with me, because I was just like, wow, you are incredible. Like, she had so much to say, and she was incredibly politically astute, and so it was kind of like an opportunity to build leadership as we go, which is one of my kind of bugbears about about the left. We don't do it enough. Too many gatekeepers and not enough people stepping aside and letting next generation through. And so I'm kind of a quite keen believer in making sure that whatever project you do, whatever campaign you do, whatever kind of political education, whatever you want to call it, that like the first objective is to build leadership, because we're going to be here a while.
So I really like that about the political education project, where you'd have someone who is pretty young leading the session and giving their opinions, and that was always really good. And it's also like the idea of, I think it was very clear that you wanted to give away the project quite a lot, and then it's something we talk about quite a lot, like you've got to give away your power. And I think people really struggle to understand it, like particularly top-down people. They can't get their heads around it. Like the idea is bring people with you and leading from the middle, leading from the middle of a group and bringing people with you. That's the idea. Is that the kind of leadership vision you have for that?
I think that's the kind of leaders we need to all be. But don't get me wrong, like, I love the limelight. I love being on stage. I love chatting. I love having a camera on me. Like, of course I love all that shit. But I guess it comes to a point where, like, there can only ever be one of me, but I can step aside and help grow another 10 amazing working class single mums, like, and then there'll be 10 more people out there in front of the camera or on the stages talking about organising, talking about socialism. And if we keep doing that, we actually have a chance of winning. One person is never enough. It's not a Marvel film.
That's a really good analogy. So is that how you've approached like your community organising events and things? Is that what it's all about, like getting involved? And I suppose as well, the other question I'd like to answer is, I know that you're going to give me a good answer to this one, but where does listening come in?
Well, listening is difficult for everyone, but it's particularly difficult for the people at the top, isn't it? So I think one of my roles in the last few years is working with a community organising unit, and specifically on the Green Industrial Revolution. So it was the kind of radical climate policy of the last Labour Party manifesto. And we were building the organising strategy and the movement around the policy. Like, it was pretty cool. This is the kind of thing I could like live, sleep, breathe for. If I could do that every day of my life, I would be happy ever after. It was the most exceptional year of my working life ever. Firstly, like, just building the strategy meant like loads of one-to-ones, lots of listening with climate justice communities and activists and campaigns all around the country, and people who weren't as well. Faith leaders, other civil societies, businesses, like just talking about climate issues, just transition, and actually kind of like realizing from that we need to go all the way back and kind of build the policy with people. And I made like, what was incredible was it was Rebecca Long Bailey who had that brief at the time. Her policy team was so understanding and open to kind of democratic policy making. So, and I went to them and was like, we need to do kind of barnstorms all around the country, focusing on deindustrialized areas, coastal town, ex-mining towns. Like, let's just get out there and get our organizers on it and bring people together into a room. So you would literally have like workers from a GMB union rep from a nuclear power plant sitting at a table with school strikers, with the fracking nanas, with a reverend, with some woman from the Women's Institute or whatever. Like, it was just a total mix of the community all coming together to talk about, like, you know, transport, healthcare, you know, all the things involved in the climate policy, education. And then, like, rather than saying this is a definition of a just transition and this is the policy that we're promoting, vote for us, we said, what would a just transition mean to you personally, to your family, to your children, to your job? And what do we need to do to make sure we get there for your town? And that was like, it was amazing, because like all of that information was then collected and given back to the policy team, who then used it to work out their regional green manifestos. And so, like, part of the listening there wasn't just me or the other organisers. It was also the policy teams who were there listening to people at every single event. It was also the MP, Becky, who, bless her, she was like, that amazing woman does not sleep. I swear to God, like, she was there every single weekend. This was every single weekend for almost a year, definitely 9 months. And I think there was one weekend a month or something that she was just like, yeah, my husband really, like, there needs to be one weekend when I'm at home with my family or I'm gonna, like, it's not gonna work. But like, apart from that, she was just like on it. She totally believed, and she absolutely would like be there listening to people. And then at the end of the session, and these sessions like 2 hours long, and that's quite a long time for someone who's never been to a political event before. And like, she would then get up on stage and do like, and close the whole meeting. And she would like say, oh, that table over there was this so-and-so who told me this story about this, and there was this there. I wonder if there was a campaign that we could do on that. And she was basically responding to everyone in the room. And that's what you want from a politician. Like, you want to be heard, you want to be actually listened to, and you want to know that when that person leaves the room, your voice has been heard and something's going to happen. So we would have these kind of legacy campaigns and organising. So after each event, wherever they were, an organizer would continue to work with the people in that area and kind of look at building campaigns around the issues that came up. So the work never stopped just because the event finished. So there was this one particular time, which this kind of goes back to the building leadership. This was Blackpool, and I met this amazing young woman who I think at the time must have been maybe 17-ish, 18. She'd just finishing her A-levels. She'd never been to a political event before, but she was wearing a yellow t-shirt with fracking nanas on it, which I was just like, well, a bit young for that. And so I started talking. She did a feedback as well. I thought it was really brave of her, considering she'd never been to an event like this. And so I started talking to her, and she said basically she used to, I think something like she used to pass the fracking nanas on her way back from school, and one day stopped to chat and found out about fracking and became kind of politically aware of that particular issue. They were coming to this event, so she came along. So she kind of came back and did community organising training and leadership training, and she learned a lot more about the Green Industrial Revolution policy. I did some like media and spokesperson training with her. And in 6 months, she was doing roundtable events with Naomi Klein. speaking on panels in front of hundreds of people with like the shadow chancellor and like other MPs. During the election, she did kind of interviews in Vice magazine and radio and The Guardian and like talking. But by then she was just such an amazing leader in her own right. And she understood the policy right down to like, that was the fire in her belly. Like that was it. That was it for her. That she was so important. And I think it was like seeing, her name was Tara. And it was seeing Tara and her journey that really, really hit home for me how important leadership building actually is. And like, actually, when you're organising, being in the room, part of the listening is to listen out for those opportunities to kind of build leadership, to nurture the space. And so people need to feel happy to come forward and happy to do the feedback from the room. And like that space needs to be held so that we can do that work and do that kind of organising. And Tara went on to university and is then started working on like student rent strikes at her university and organising cleaners, and like she hasn't stopped. She's like gone off and like doing some amazing work on her own. Like kind of check in with her once in a while and just like, you're so cool. And it feels wonderful to kind of to know her and watch her develop from afar. But yeah, listening and leadership kind of very much integral to everything we should do as socialists, I think.
It's so different from the models that we see of other types of leadership where like, you know, leadership is about presentation and it's about like, you know, I think a lot of the time, one of the things I see about leaders that get quite a long way in our society at the moment, the defining feature of them is ambition. Like they want to be leaders and they feel entitled to be leaders. And you know what you describe is the opposite of that, isn't it? It's like finding a leader who wouldn't have been otherwise like able to do that, and that's such a better way of doing it. You know, I think, you know, like how do you feel when you see people who feel like they're entitled to this leadership role, who'll come on high and tell you how things are? Like say Boris Johnson, for example, he just had an ambition of being prime minister from a young age, which makes me think that should be right. You're not allowed to be prime minister because that's not, you know.
You can imagine it, can't you? Say, Mummy, I want to be prime minister. Yes, dear, of course you will. Well, if we said that, be like, yeah, all right.
There's that weird kid again.
If you say so, love.
So like, you know, do you think we need to, I think a lot of people would agree with that form of leadership model, yet we just readily accept that. How do we change that perception around like what type of leaders we should be? Because we are in that like kind of smart suit, nice haircut, that kind of leader. How do we move away from that?
I mean, it's what we're told a leader should be, isn't it? And it's kind of, I think we're so indoctrinated into this idea that they need to be super sharp and not one of us. Like there needs to be this separation. But that's not the socialist way, is it? I think actually as socialists, if we want to really counter that narrative, it does go back to organising and showing that, and actually kind of turning the concept of leadership on its head. It's not about one person, and it's not about one person standing and being elected as a representative. Leadership comes in every single form. It's everywhere. It could be, you know, the PTA. It could be the, you know, that one person, for example, during lockdown, like on the street that I was living in then, we didn't really know each other very well, but there was this one person, a mum and a daughter, who pretty much brought the whole street together in a WhatsApp group, and then like actually kind of built friendships up. But they kind of actually were the leaders, like they did that. And so I think we need to kind of value our communities and kind of go back and look at what we define leadership as, and then ask ourselves, do we see that represented in Parliament?
Do you ever wonder how many like leaders have gone by the wayside? Like, you know, like how many people who could have been just absolutely incredible community leaders that have, as you've described earlier on, they're just too tired. they're just working too hard. You know, do you ever think about that?
Yeah, all the time. Like, I just meet so many people and I just think, God, like, why are you not in Westminster? Like, you're exactly the kind of person we need there. But I think we're also told that we're not, you know, you're not political unless you're a very particular way. Like, it's a very kind of, you know, elitist thing being involved in politics here. It's so many people that, you know, I've gone out canvassing or meet would be like, oh yeah, but you're really political and I'm not political. And it's just like, yeah, you are. You're probably more political than I am. You probably have loads more opinions than I am. You just like you just don't think you have, or you don't see them as being political when actually they are. So I think, like, again, going back into working class communities and like building each other up. Yeah, you are political. Yes, we are political. Yes, we can win. We can come together and we can organize, and like we can do all this stuff. But that also does mean like not constantly platforming one particular person over another.
Yeah. And again, to reference back to the tiredness that you mentioned earlier on, our system is like it's a system in which I think a lot of people who would be potentially leaders end up just like working really, really hard in difficult jobs. They feel like they've got no access to any sort of political power whatsoever. And they probably just want to have a break, and they probably just want to go and watch some telly sometimes. And just like when they come in, they don't have time to educate themselves. And I think we had this tradition of certainly around like mining libraries and things like that, where people would go and they would learn about all sorts of different things in those. That seems to be gone. And if anything, we seem to be working harder. How, you know, do you have any ideas about how we're going to challenge that? And, you know, is there any sort of bite-sized way we can get people like hooked in and sort of interested in learning a little bit more about political education?
I think maybe we might need to stop calling it political education. It might put people off. I know, I was in the hairdressers this week. It's the first time in over a year I've managed to get an appointment. And it felt really great being in there. I thought, I can go and have a coffee, read the Cosmo mag. It's going to be brilliant. And I got in and there's no magazines. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And obviously it's because of the COVID rules and restrictions. And she's like, oh, but, you know, we do now have a bookshelf and you can take the book, you can have a look at the books that we have. They had a whole range of books, like classics, as well as, you know, romance novels, like a whole range of different things. I said, but you just have to take it away, you know, clean it, put it in this bag and bring it back. And I was just like, huh, this is great. This is happening. Like we are doing it. We're doing, this is our own form of self-education in our communities. It's happening in our hairdressers or in our, like in our small kind of spaces that we go to every day. And I think like we need to think kind of more local when we think about political education and how we get there and how we kind of do that work, because it can literally be just like that. Like I can just say I've got a load of books and leave it at the hairdressers and like see who picks it up. Maybe I should leave my number in there. You can join my reading group.
Yeah, if you like this book, please call. I think it might be a little bit frowned upon. Yeah.
But I'm also like really, really keen on picking back up some of the ideas around Momentum Kids. And I know like that particular strand didn't kind of pick up in the way that I really, really wanted it to. But I would love to do the next iteration of it. Like, you know, very much like Black Panthers breakfast clubs, the kind of idea of kind of bringing people together, having food, you know, educating our children, educating ourselves and each other, but kind of focused on young people. I think that's, you know, I get that as socialists and like the older generation, we've got to do that as well. But I find the kind of like, particularly the 14 to 16 age group, absolutely fascinating. they've got so many ideas about how they think things can be different, so many ideas about how to change the world. Like, that is where the hope is for kind of the next kind of generation of transformation, for the next generation of socialists. Like, it's there. And like, before I do anything, like whatever speech I'm asked to do, or like maybe an interview or something like this, I kind of generally kind of will go to my kids, oh, I'm doing this thing, what do you think? And just like slip it in, not pretending not to be, I think they probably know what I'm up to, but and they just like seem to have some really interesting ideas that then kind of shake the way I look at things. Like the first time I had to do a talk on Green New Deal climate policy, and I didn't really know much about climate activism or policy at the time, but I was asked to kind of go and talk, but I guess perhaps as like a non-expert, and I was kind of quite terrified because this was on a platform, with Becky Long Bailey and Faiza Shaheen and Sakina, who was from Platform, who's now an amazing elected representative at GLA. I'm very proud of her. But these are like super smart women on this platform, and me. And I was like, oh God, what am I going to say? And so I asked my daughter, like, what do you learn at school about climate policy or about climate crisis? And she said, oh, well, not very much. And she went through all the usual stuff, like, you have to turn the lights off and you have to recycle, and like very much about personal responsibility, not about collective responsibility at all. And so I said, like, do you think that all these things are working and like we're going to save the planet that way? And she was just like, not really. And I was like, well, what do you think? And so I gave her a few statistics about like carbon emissions and how like, most of it comes from like about 10 corporate polluting companies, and like actually it doesn't really touch on kind of individual use. And like, what do you think about that? And she said like, oh, it's a bit like that game Pop the Weasel. And I was like, well, what? She's like, yeah, well, basically the weasel keeps popping up and they're the corporate polluting companies. And then there's a hammer and you have to keep bashing them down. And then they'll pop up somewhere else and you have to bash them back down again. And they pop up somewhere else and you have to bash them back down again. And I was like, oh, right, okay. Like that's how you deal with those companies. I was like, great. Yeah, she was quite young at the time. I thought that was quite a good assessment. Tick, job done, parent. And I was like, well, who's the hammer? And she was like, we are, obviously. And I was like, yes. So they get it. They get, like, without needing kind of the formal political education, young people totally understand what needs to happen. We need to keep smashing these guys down. And it was such a beautiful way of putting it. And it kind of like, for me, if you're talking about kind of education around climate policy, like start there. And then work your way up to participatory policy and learning about the just transition, and then hit people with the data and the numbers, because like no one joins a campaign because they heard some percentages in a poll. They joined because whatever it is affects them and their lives, and that's what drives them. So you kind of like start there with political education as well.
Yeah, to me, like, I think we know, like, I think intuitively we know what's right and we know what we care about and we know what needs to be done. And I suppose the education side of it, and I agree with you, we're probably going to have to take that word out, because it sounds like, just, even though it doesn't mean that, it's meant to be a dialogue, it's meant to be a two-way thing, education, but it's become this like top down telling you what to do. But I think that the way people feel about that, the way people feel is valid and they should be listened to. And the education side is that, oh, this is what we can do about it. We could do this. There's this method already. It's like kind of shortcuts almost.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we should call it, like political shortcuts. And we'll tell people about, like, this is how you do this. This is how you do a protest. This is how you do a campaign. But I was on to you can comment on that if you like, or don't feel like you have to. But I wanted to move on because you've already been there. Really, it's the hopes for the future section, and it's really clear what that's a big hope for the future that you've just described there. So, is that your hope for the future, like educating young people in that like proper sense, where it's a two-way thing where you learn from each other?
Yeah, totally. Except I think we've both agreed we're not going to say education anymore. So like,
So hard for me as a teacher, man. I'm the worst. I called elections exams quite a few times
I
in
mean,
meetings.
yeah,
And then
there are
I'm
good
like,
times
oh,
exams though, right?
yeah. It's like, oh, we've got exams coming up, and people are like, what exams? What exams? I mean, you know, the local exams coming up in a few weeks' time. You mean elections? Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's really easy to kind of say the reason why I particularly like working with young people around political education or climate justice work is because I'm a mum, and like those for me that's the easy bit. I'm a mum. I've got young children. They will inherit the earth. How are we going to leave it for them? The other side of it is also that it is, like I've said before, like something I absolutely truly believe is really important to our socialist values, and that is building grassroots working class leadership. And I think like that work is amazing and being done in the trade union movement, but not everyone's in a trade union. I mean, should be, and if you're listening to us, please go and join one. But like, let's be honest, it's not, you know, not everyone is in it, and not everyone understands why they should be in it either. So I think like really kind of doing that work in that age group is how we kind of ensure the longevity of our movement, like make sure it's sustainable. Like we might have the next 10 years doing this. Like it doesn't look like the Tories are going anywhere fast. And in fact, it feels like a further push to the right. So how do we then kind of look at working with young people? Like what platforms are they? Where are they at? What platforms are they on? And like my two are always laughing at me. They'll tell me like, Mum, say this word. And it's some like weird word from TikTok or whatever. And I'll say it and they'll both like crack up laughing because I say it with a really old person's, you know, accent or whatever. Like, you know, they're always like, there was, and then, you know, I mentioned something about what's going on in Palestine at the moment to my little girl, and she was like, "Oh, I heard about that. And did you see that residential building that got blown up?" And I was just like, "How do you know?" I was genuinely thinking, "How on earth does she know about that?" Because I know she doesn't watch the news. And it was all from TikTok. Like they're getting their political education from, you know, social media platforms, or their news education from social media platforms and other people's opinions. Like these are the spaces that we need to be at, as well as organising in schools and with parents and with teachers. But like, opening out our spaces is just like another reason why the spaces that give me so much hope on the left are the ones that actually are intergenerational, where if there are families around. So like 2016, the first World Transform Festival we had this big festival hall in the Blackie in Liverpool. Do you know it? That building? It's so beautiful. And inside is just like this giant size hall, and we filled it with like artwork and paintings and big banners, like trade union banners that were all done by Ed Hall, the trade union banner maker. And there was a particular series that he did of every death in police custody. And like, it was just bright. It was busy. There were children on those little wheelies. Do you remember those wheelies that all the kids had? Or a nightmare in supermarkets, but the kids loved them. And like, you know, then there was like the over 60s socialist choir, and like it was so buzzing and beautiful and full of energy and full of hope. And like, of course, we were all also in the struggle together, and we were talking about revolution, we were talking about policies, we were talking about the fight, but we were fucking there together, and we were laughing and dancing and singing and drinking, and like, it was so amazing. And those are the spaces that we will like be able to organize in and bring young people into. And I think the moment that you have spaces like that, they become immediately less antagonistic, less factional, less hostile, because people have to behave themselves. There are kids about. like, like don't be that guy. You know. And so we did have a creche, but we also, you know, had this idea that there would be what's the CBS checked? Is that the right term? You know, with the kind
DBS,
of DBS checked volunteers who could be in the room, and you know, just in case there were women who were breastfeeding and didn't want to leave their babies in the creche, but they also wanted the chance to get involved in a round table event or ask a question. There'd be someone to kind of like carry or play with your child. Like, it was very much like you can be in the space if you want to, or, you know, absolutely, if you want to leave your kid in a creche and not think about it for the day, that's totally fine as well. I would have loved that personally. Like, off you go, bye. And I think like those are the spaces that we have continued to evolve in TWT, and I think there's a load more spaces outside of TWT as well that we can kind of really support and organize in. One of my biggest, that whenever I do a meeting on this particular project, is a climate justice organizing project that is led by mostly young, mostly people of color. I'm probably one of the oldest, which is kind of normal in political activism. It's like I always feel like I'm the oldest one in the room. And we are looking at developing an organizing strategy for climate justice work in working class communities, in Black and brown communities. And what does climate justice organizing mean? Not just like campaigns, big organizing, mobilizing, like what does the justice bit mean? What does the organizing mean in our context, in the kind of context of our time and in the UK? How, you know, what's happening around the world? How can we learn from it? And so we're having like, basically the next 6 months is going to be conversations around like developing that strategy. But I think, you know, that is the work, but like the experience of it is so exciting. Even if I have to do it for a few hours at night after a whole day and after the kids, it fills me with so much joy, because even though the scope of the work is tremendous, like deep community organizing in communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis, and we're talking about like 3, 5, 10 years worth of work. I mean, it's like quite overwhelming, but it's also so hopeful and exciting, because the space that we have created is for anyone to come in. You know, we're looking at the lowest bar of entry here, like, you know, is this group for you? Can you breathe? Yes, come in. Like, it needs to be that, you know, that's the pitch that we're going for. And yeah, and we check in with each other a lot, and we're really kind of embodying a kind of idea of collective care as we go along as being a radical act, something the left aren't particularly good at. We tend to like work and work and work until we drop down and drink too much and smoke too much. All the things that I love. And yeah, so that fills me with so much love and joy.
Well, that's given me a lot of hope as well. It's a really brilliant answer, and thank you so much. And on behalf of Socialist Think Tank, I want to thank you again for coming on. I feel like I've sat here and learned again. This is a massive privilege to be able to just sit and listen to people and hear people's ideas and stuff. And yeah, thank you so much. Don't forget that you can like and share and subscribe and do all those things to Socialist Think Tank. You can also become a member, where we try to do a little bit of what you've talked about, Sasha, where we're trying to like bring people with us and find people and develop them, and, you know, champion causes. We like to amplify people's voices as well. So it's
you really do. What you did for the Political Education Project was incredible. You kind of brought it all to life and did those audios. It was really a labor of love. Couldn't thank you enough.
It's great. We managed to like I managed to read a James Connolly speech, and you know, people might think he sounded like me. He was Scottish.
I probably used them more than I actually did the reading. Don't tell Paul. Paul won't watch this, hopefully, and he won't know. I cheated.
Well, on that note, let's before we reveal any more secrets, let's thank you again, and we'll definitely be seeing you again. Brilliant. See you soon.
Bye.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.